The temperature readout on your secondary monitor says minus 14.3. You read it 3 times before you touch anything. Outside the window of the Bergen Meteorological Institute, it is a Tuesday in October, and the fjord is gray-green and normal, and a ferry is crossing it on schedule. And the temperature on that monitor is 11 degrees colder than it was at 6 this morning. And you have been a meteorologist for 9 years, and you have never seen a number move like that without a reason you could name in 3 words or fewer. You pull up the sensor array, all 17 stations reporting. No instrument failure flags. The Svalbard uplink is clean. The Tromsø relay is clean. The coastal buoys are transmitting. You check the barometric data. You check the upper atmosphere soundings from the 6 a.m. radiosonde launch. You check the sea surface temperature feed from the Norwegian Meteorological Institute's North Atlantic grid. Everything is live. Everything is reading, and the temperature is dropping. Not the way temperature drops in a front, not the way it drops when a cold air mass slides south from the Arctic on a pressure gradient you can trace on a chart. It is dropping the way a fever breaks. Fast in one direction, with a finality that the numbers keep insisting on. You open a new model run. What you don't know yet. What you won't know until the model finishes processing at 2:17 a.m. is that this isn't a regional anomaly. The Icelandic low has done something no recorded Icelandic low has done in the 847 years of Norse temperature record keeping that your colleague Frida wrote her dissertation on. The SST anomaly in the Norwegian Sea is minus 6.4 degrees Celsius across a 200,000 square kilometer patch of water that should be reading 8 degrees warmer. Your models are about to tell you that this is not a weather event, it is a thermal collapse. You know what's coming is worse than what you can currently see. That much you already know. That much the number on the monitor has already told you. You start your third model run of the evening and you put the kettle on and you wait. The signs of what is happening sound when you finally have enough data to understand it. At 2:17 a.m., sitting alone in a building that emptied out hours ago, is this. The North Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, the vast conveyor belt of warm water that keeps Norway inhabitable, the thing that makes it possible to grow grain at 60 degrees north latitude, has undergone a rapid non-linear phase transition. Not a slowdown, not the gradual weakening that climate models have been projecting for 40 years. A collapse. The warm surface current that flows north along the Norwegian coast has reversed. Cold bottom water, water that last saw daylight during the Younger Dryas, is surfacing in a 200,000 square kilometer upwelling event north of the Faroe Islands. The models show what happens next. Day 1, minus 15 across southern Norway by midnight, minus 22 in the mountain corridors. Day 2, the North Sea surface temperature drops below zero. Ice formation begins. Day 3. The precipitation sitting in the atmosphere over central Scandinavia begins to fall as snow. Not regular snow. Snow the way it snowed 12,000 years ago when there was no Gulf Stream left to argue with the continental air masses. Day 4. Oslo. The model runs the accumulation rate. You run it again with different parameters. You run it a third time with the conservative boundary conditions, the ones your supervisor prefers, the ones that have never once over-predicted in 9 years of your using them. 1.4 meters of ice accumulation in the Oslo basin inside 96 hours. The number sits there on your screen. You are not panicking. That is the thing you'll remember later, that you weren't panicking. Your hands are very still on the keyboard. You notice this. Your hands are completely still and you are breathing at a normal rate and you are looking at a number that means Oslo is going to be buried and your brain hasn't finished deciding what to call it yet. You save the model output, you export the data package, you attach it to an email to your supervisor, Halvard, and you write the subject line, urgent, a MOC collapse event, model output, immediate review, required. You send it at 2:31 a.m. You sit back in your chair. The ferry is still crossing the fjord. Its navigation lights are green and red in the dark water. It is operating on schedule because the schedule was built in a world where the temperature readout said minus 3.1 and the model showed a cold snap through Thursday and a mild weekend coming in from the southwest. That world ended about 8 hours ago. You just don't know yet how few people are going to believe you. By 7 a.m., there are 4 people in the building who have seen your data. 3 of them have a version of the same face, the face of someone who wants your models to be wrong badly enough that they are going to find a way to make them wrong. Your supervisor, Halvard, reads the email on his phone at the breakfast table, apparently because when he arrives at 7:22, he's already done a preliminary review, and the preliminary review has found what he needs it to find. A sensor calibration flag on 2 of the 17 coastal stations from last month's maintenance cycle. The flags are routine. They have nothing to do with the current readings. You know this. He knows this. He tells you the models need to be revalidated before any official communication goes out. You look at him. You have worked with Halvard for 6 years. You know the way he buttons his coat? Always the second button first, then the bottom, then the top. A sequence that makes no practical sense and that he's clearly been doing since he was 8 years old and nobody ever told him to stop. You know that he takes his coffee black until after 10 a.m. and then adds milk, and that he cannot explain why. You know that he has 2 grandchildren in Oslo who take the tram to school on Tuesday mornings because he shows you the photos and his face does something complicated and proud. You know that he's the most respected voice in Norwegian meteorological science. You also know that he signed the calibration flag report last month. You know that if your models are right, the flag report is irrelevant. And you know that if the flag report is the reason the models are being held for revalidation, then Halvard is using a true but irrelevant fact to buy time before his name is attached to a decision this large. He tells you the revalidation will take 48 hours. You do the math. You do it in front of him, on paper, while he's still talking. You write the number at the bottom and you turn the paper toward him. He looks at it 48 hours before the precipitation event begins. You tell him 96 hours before the accumulation models show Oslo under 1.4 meters. An evacuation of the Oslo basin takes a minimum of 60 hours under good conditions. Good conditions are ending. You need to start the emergency contact protocol now, this morning, before rush hour, before the roads fill with people driving to work in a city that has 4 days left. Halvard picks up your paper. He looks at the number for a long time. He sets it down. He tells you the models need to be revalidated. The next 31 hours are a specific kind of exhausting that has nothing to do with sleep. You call the Norwegian Directorate for Civil Protection. You get a duty officer who takes your name and your institute affiliation and tells you that official warnings must come through official channels and that he cannot act on a communication from an individual analyst without institute authorization. You call the Met Office liaison in London because the AMOC collapse, if that's what this is there a catastrophe too? You get a voicemail. You send the data package to 3 researchers at Bergen University whose contact information you have from a conference in 2021. One of them responds at midnight. He says the data is extraordinary and he needs to run his own models. He says 48 hours. You sit in the monitoring room at 1 a.m. and you watch the temperature feed from the 17 coastal stations. Minus 19.7 in Tromsø. Minus 16.2 in Bergen. The sea surface temperature off Stavanger has dropped 2.8 degrees since noon. The precipitation event in the upper atmosphere, the thing your models show turning into the accumulation event, is organizing faster than the 48-hour scenario. You run the updated projections. Oslo, 72 hours, not 96. The ferry is not running. The fjord is starting to freeze at the margins. The navigation lights are off. You have been awake for 31 hours. You have the updated model output on your screen and Halvard's personal number on your phone and the number of the director of the Norwegian Emergency Management Agency on a card in your desk that you have never used, because in 9 years there has never been a reason to use it. You understand what using that number means. It means going around Halvard. It means a data package arrives at the director's desk with your name on it and not the institute's authorization behind it, and the director calls the institute for confirmation, and Harvard says the models are under revalidation, and then you are an analyst who went above the chain of command with unvalidated data during what is officially a severe cold snap. Your career in Norwegian meteorological science is over, or it means Halvard is the one who calls, which means you called Halvard first, which means you show him the updated projections. You put him in the room with a number that proves his 48-hour revalidation window has already cost 12 hours. And you do it in a way that gives him the chance to be the person who makes the call. You know what that will cost him. You know his grandchildren take the tram on Tuesday mornings. You pick up the phone. He answers on the second ring. His voice is the voice of someone who has been awake watching the same feeds you have. You tell him about the updated projection. You tell him 72 hours. You tell him the precipitation event is organizing faster than the model showed yesterday, and that you need him to make the call tonight, now, in the next hour. Because after that hour, the difference between an orderly evacuation and whatever comes next starts closing faster than the fjord. There's a silence on the line, not the silence of someone who doesn't believe you. The silence of someone who has been running the same numbers in a different room and has arrived at the same place and is deciding whether to say so. He tells you to send him the updated output. You send it. 14 minutes later, your phone rings. It is not Halvard. It is the duty director at the Norwegian Emergency Management Agency, and she is calling because she has just received a call from the Bergen Meteorological Institute's Director of Operations, and she needs to understand what she's looking at. You tell her. She is quiet for a moment. Then, how long have you had this data? 33 hours, you tell her. A different kind of silence. She tells you to stay by your phone. The evacuation order for Oslo comes down at 4:47 a.m. Not full evacuation, staged emergency withdrawal, priority populations first, language designed to move 200,000 people without the word evacuation appearing in the first broadcast. The broadcast goes out at 5:15 a.m., 45 minutes before rush hour. The roads out of Oslo fill by 6. The E6 North is stopped at Jessheim by 6:30. The E18 West is solid by 7. Halvard retires 8 months later. He never mentions the 33 hours. You never mention it either. What you do instead is finish your report. You write it the way you were trained. Data, methodology, findings, limitations, recommendations. You write it for the record, for the archive, for the researchers who will spend the next decade trying to understand what happened to the AMOC and when the signs were there and whether anyone saw them earlier than anyone admits. The report takes 6 weeks to write. In the margins, the notes you keep that are not for the archive. You find yourself returning to a question that has nothing to do with methodology. The call you made at 1 a.m. The one to Halvard instead of directly to the director. You tell yourself you made it because it was the right procedural choice. Because having the institute behind the data mattered. Because Halvard, with his name and his reputation, could move the director faster than you could alone. All of that is true. The other thing that's true is that Halvard's grandchildren take the tram on Tuesday mornings. And you knew that, and when you picked up the phone at 1 a.m., you knew it then too. You don't know if those two things are separate. You've been trying to figure out if they're separate for 8 months now, late at night in the margins of a report that will be read by people who will never know to ask the question. The temperature has come back, slowly, over 6 months, in increments that the models are still trying to explain. Bergen is -2 today. Oslo is rebuilding. The fjord is open again. Your coffee is cold. You don't know if you called Halvard because it was the right call or because you needed it to be his decision. So you didn't have to be the one who sat with what 33 hours cost. You don't know if there's a version of you who dials the director at 2:31 a.m. and saves 12 hours and lives with being the analyst who went around the chain. You don't know which of those people you would rather be. You don't know if the ice made you careful or if it just gave you a reason.